Well, as we've been discussing this morning, of course, our friend John Feinstein passed away yesterday, and someone who knew John very well was involved with John's events, and I have no doubt had many fights with John Feinstein over the years as well. Is a friend of ours and is certainly one of the greatest coaches in college basketball history. The great Gary Williams is with us this morning here on GCR. Coach, it's Glenn. It's always good to talk to you. I hate that we're doing it like this, but thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Oh, no problem, Glenn. Excuse me. It is a tough time. I knew John since probably 1978 when I became the basketball coach at American U. And he was always John had an unbelievable memory. Like he'd interview after a game or whatever, he wouldn't take a lot of notes, and you think, well, I can't wait to see that article tomorrow. But it was word for word. He nailed it, and that's what he had. He was very intelligent, and I think it showed in his writing because he was so varied in what he could do, whether it was politics, sports, whatever the sport, multi-sports, and just probably the most prolific sports writer in terms of writing books we've seen.
There's no question about that. Coach John was not shy with his opinions. Like, there's no question about that. And
Oh no,
and sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
no, that's all right.
Sometimes
No,
that can rattle a coach, that can frustrate a coach. But yet, I was
yeah,
always fascinated by your relationship with him. Like, was it just a respect that you had for his profession? Why, despite the fact that you knew inevitably he was going to be saying things negative at times about you, were you so close with him?
yeah. John didn't let friendship get in the way of saying negative things about myself, but I respected him because he was honest. I don't think he ever deliberately tried to hurt you. He was just reporting what he felt was out there, and just he did a book on the ACC when I was at Maryland, uh, March to Madness, and it was he had access to each team for two practices, and he got to sit right behind the bench for a couple games, and it was an amazing book. It didn't get the same play as Season on the Brink, but at the same time, he really was able to get into every program in the ACC and really do a good job with it. And he dealt with the Krzyzewskis. He dealt with everybody, and everybody respected John for what he did. And of course, you never won an argument with John. I mean, that wasn't going to happen. You might as well go fishing or something than have an argument with John because he was going to win.
On the flip side, I always felt like there was an enormous amount, despite his willingness to criticize, and it's something that I think I learned from him in my ventures into this business, was the respect that he had for you in particular, but for everyone in this profession. That yes, he was going to be tough on you, but I always sensed that he had an incredible respect for particularly the coaches in this business.
Yeah, I think he had a pretty good feel, and that probably goes back when he was undergraduate at Duke. He wrote for the school paper there when Krzyzewski was getting it going, and he came to the Washington Post directly from Duke as a summer intern, and then they kept him there after the summer. They hired him full time, and of course, they wouldn't give him the Maryland job or the Georgetown job back at that time. So they gave him to American U, where I happened to be coaching, and that's where I got to know him. And he was the same then, and I think that's something to be said in that. The way he was as he got bigger, he didn't get softer. He stayed tough, and I think that's one of the reasons for his success.
Gary Williams is with us this morning here on GCR. Coach, the BB&T Classic is something that obviously I associate you with, and when I was a younger man, my father and I went every year to see all of these major matchups. Can you tell me about how that came about and John's involvement and why it was so important for you to be involved in that event and what he was doing for Children's Charities Foundation?
Well, I think that was the key. It was a way to raise a great deal of money for children's charities, plus bring really top flight basketball to the D.C. area. Uh, and it was John's idea. The owners of the Washington Post went to John with this idea, and he ran with it, and he was the guy that did most of the legwork in
Hmm.
terms of coaches, because back then that was a commitment. You come in and play 2 games against 2 really good teams, and it was a commitment for us at Maryland too. But at the same time, it gave us a chance to play on a national stage early in the season. It was always in December, and it did raise a ton of money for children's charities, which it's one of those things I kind of wish was still around because it did so much good for the local kids.
No, it did so much good for the local kids, and it created so many memories. I mean, I can think still about some of the major wins that you guys had. So when you say that, was John the one organizing, like who the opponents were each
Yeah,
year?
he'd call you and he'd say, "Hey, you got to call a coach from Kansas." And I
Okay,
said, "Well, I don't know the coach from Kansas, but that's how he was. I mean, and you did it, because John, he was not going to let up until you did it, so you might as well do it right away and not have to put up with all the other stuff. But and coaches, he had that way. He could get somebody to come in from Stanford and play 2 games in D.C. and every once in a while we had to have a return game on that where we had to go back to the place that came in, which I wasn't real happy about. But it gave us a good strength of schedule anyway.
I, I still think about the UConn game, right, and the foreshadowing of what was to be in the NCAA
Oh
tournament
yeah,
that year, right? Like,
yeah. That UConn game was they were good, and I was worried about having to play them again at the end of the year because they were going to get better because they were a little young when we played them in
right,
December.
right.
So
Uh,
and they were good. They were really good. That was our toughest game in the NCAA
I,
tournament in 2002.
Greatest basketball game I ever witnessed. I still get sweats thinking about that game. Coach, if I could, we know how important golf is to you. We know how important it was to John. How much did you guys play golf over the years?
John stopped playing as time went on, but he had access to all the players. In fact, he did with Tom Watson a golf tournament for Tom Watson's caddy, who Bruce Edwards, who died of ALS, and every year we do it somewhere, and it was all great courses. But once again, it was John, pushing people to be there, whether it was golf pros, basketball coaches, whatever. John, made sure that you'd consider playing in the tournament, and he always had a great field, and it raised a lot of money for the ALS Foundation.
That's awesome. Coach, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously, we're talking on this Friday at the start of the Big Ten tournament. I just wonder for you, for how much you care about this program, what this season has meant to you, and seeing the job that Kevin Willard has done, and kind of reestablishing Maryland basketball in a prominent way this season.
Right. I think for me, as basketball has really changed in the last 3-4 years of the NIL and the
Yeah.
transfer portal, it meant that Maryland can compete on a national level. And that's what Kevin Willard's done. He's proven in today's game, and he's doing what you have to do to be successful, is to be able to go out and get players, bring them in, put them together, and they play so well together for only having really one player who was a dominant player from last year's team. And they've gone out and they've established themselves, and all of a sudden they're the second seed in the Big Ten tournament, and hopefully will have a very good seed in the NCAA tournament. So I think for Maryland fans, that's the big thing. We can do this. We can handle. There's some schools that are really struggling with the new concepts that are out there and paying players and all that. But I think Maryland has proven that we can go and compete with the top teams in the country.
Can I ask you? You bring up the fact that there's only one, but it's such a special story to me, and I'm not trying to make Juju Reese Walt Williams because I understand the difference in those two situations. But someone who decided to stick around through coaching changes, through struggles, both from a team standpoint and a personal standpoint. What has Juju Reese's story meant to you in the way that he's come around as a 4-year guy and been so important to this team this season?
Well, he's what every coach wants, is somebody who is loyal to the program, very talented, and keeps working hard. For instance, like his improvement from the free throw line this year is
Yeah.
just incredible. Team players don't usually improve by that much, especially as they get into their junior year or whatever. And that's what Reese has done. Plus, I think he's the anchor. In other words, the players that are there now playing with him, he's really helped them get into Maryland basketball, get into the university. And that's what you need, I think, in today's game. You need that one guy that's been around, and knows the ups and downs of the league and all those things. Because as a player, you can act tough and all that, but you need that experience. You need somebody that you can lean on. And I think that's what Reese has given the team.
Kevin brought up the idea of him being worthy of having his jersey hang in the rafters. And I know from a sheer like talent standpoint or accomplishment standpoint, he certainly isn't at the level of some of those guys that are up there. But for what he meant to the program, and in this era where we don't see this, could you see that as being something he'd be worthy of receiving?
Yes, I could because your jersey goes up there because you are talented, but you're also because of what you meant to the
Yeah.
program, what you meant to the university, and nobody's done a better job on a national basis of hanging in there with the program as went through a coaching change, a very good year his first year, not so good year maybe last year, and then all of a sudden leading the team to a top 15 basketball program this year, and who knows what you can do in the NCAA tournament. So, you stay open because he's done so many good things for Maryland basketball that I'm sure people will consider it.
We're going to have Dwayne Simpkins join us a little bit later on. You mentioned, obviously, your started American. Seeing him and everything that he meant to you, then going to that place, and I know you were there to support him originally. How special is that story for you that Dwayne now has them in the NCAA tournament?
Well, it's a great story. Happy for Dwayne because he came out of DeMatha, played for us on the team with Keith Booth, Joe Smith, X-Ray Hip, Johnny Rhodes. That was a very young team that got to the Sweet 16, and Dwayne was the point guard, and his shot against Georgetown really got us going. He dropped in a little floater in overtime to beat Georgetown, which was our first big national win after I got the job at Maryland. So I'm happy for Dwayne. I'm happy for American U because they gave me the chance to be a head coach, which is they're not just laying around waiting for you, and they took a chance on a young assistant coach. So I've always appreciated that.
And obviously, that was, of course, Joe Smith's coming out party, that game against Georgetown. That was a special day at the old building in Landover. Coach, I just want to tell you a story real quick, and you probably have no memory of this whatsoever, but the night you guys lost to Morgan State, I asked you a question in the press conference, and you got after me a good bit. I don't even remember what the question was, but you got after me, and I understood because it was a tough night. But John was actually the one that once upon a time had told me when I was a young man, never take any of this personally. Never take any of it personally. And so it was John who taught me how to handle myself. And then we saw each other 3 days later, and everything was right back to being fine. And I asked you a question, and everything was. But I learned that lesson from John Feinstein. And I think about it all the time, and I think about you and how much respect and reverence I've had for you in my career and how important it was for me to learn that lesson from John. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate you that it wasn't personal. And that obviously it was, these things just happen when we have conversations and we can be men afterwards. And so I appreciate you and I appreciate him, and it just sort of tied all of that together for me.
Well, thanks. And, that was John. You could disagree with him, but that never meant that you weren't going to be friends with him because he had his opinion. You're just like yourself. You have your opinion, I have my opinion, and that doesn't mean we don't respect each other or can't get along. And I think it was great back then. I wish there was more debating now on issues. I think that would be a big thing for our country and, for college basketball even, just, to hear everybody's side of the story, not just say, here's my side and
Right.
I'm not going to listen to anything else. And that goes on too much today. And, and I think John was the great one with that, where, he could keep his friendships, even though he never would waver on his opinions.
There's no question about it. And it was a great lesson, and it was from you as well, that, just days later, I needed to know that. I needed to know it was okay. Like, I can ask a question.
Yeah.
We can go back and forth. That's the way it can go. But you've got a job to do, and I did. I appreciate that as a younger man in this business, having that interaction with you. Coach,
Well, no problem.
it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. I wish it wasn't reflecting like this on someone that we cared about so much. But thank you for doing this with us this morning. We always appreciate you taking the time for us.
My pleasure, Glenn. Thank you.
Hey, Coach.